So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's conference with Le Cercle des Langues. Today, we are going to be discussing comparatives and superlatives. So, beyond bigger and the biggest. Take the comparison a step further. Today's conference is for level A1 to level A2. We will have the conference for the first 25 minutes, and in the last 5 minutes, we will have questions and answers. So if you have any questions, please put them into the chat or write them on a piece of paper so that we can discuss them when we are finished. So let's begin. In today's conference, we will look at 4 things. Number 1, going beyond basic comparisons. Number 2, mastering superlatives in different contexts. Number 3, comparing actions, not just things. And number 4, expressing subtle differences in meaning.
Mais c'est pour un, c'est pas manager.
Bon, je vais juste continuer. D'accord. Let's have a look. So welcome everyone. Today we are going beyond the basics of comparatives and superlatives to explore how comparisons can add depth and precision to your English. By the end, you will feel more confident using comparisons in everyday speech, writing, and even persuasive conversations. So let's start with going beyond comparisons. Expanding beyond bigger and the biggest. Comparatives and superlatives allow us to describe differences, but there are many ways to go beyond basic forms like bigger and the biggest. We use different structures depending on the adjectives, length, and meaning. Understanding these patterns helps us express comparisons more precisely. So, the comparative. The comparative form is used to compare two people, places, or things by showing differences in quality, quantity, or degree. For example, this book is more interesting than the last one. So remember that we use adjectives to create our comparative and our superlative. So we always begin with an adjective. So what are the rules? How do we create the comparison? We start with short adjectives. Short adjectives normally have one syllable or they end in Y, and we generally add ER. Example, tall becomes taller. Happy becomes happier. For long adjectives, which are adjectives that have 2 or more syllables, we use more before the adjective. Such adjectives are expensive, 3 syllables, interesting, amazing. All of these adjectives with 2 or more syllables will take the word more before. So we wouldn't say interestinger parce que c'est se dit pas. We say it is more interesting. You can also find irregular adjectives. These mean they are adjectives that change completely. For example, good becomes better. So here we have some popular adjectives and their changes. Small becomes smaller, and the superlative is smallest. Happy becomes happier, and the superlative is happiest. You can see that with happier, we take away the Y and we add I-E-R. Expensive becomes more expensive and most expensive. Bad is an irregular adjective, so it changes completely. We go from bad to worse to worst. Far, we can use farther or further, or farthest or furthest. So when we talk about a comparative, it compares or it goes to the superlative, which is the highest. What happens when we want to go less, moins? When we use less, less is the opposite of more and is used to make weaker comparisons. Not as, ... as is another way to compare things without using a comparative adjective. And intensifiers, for example, much, a bit, a lot, help to express the degree of difference. So less is moins. So moins cher que, less expensive than, and not as, with as, pas aussi que. Exemple, pas aussi grande que, not as big as. So what do we do in this case? When we use less, we do not change the adjective. We simply add the adjective after the word less. Donc, on dit pas less more exciting. Ça ne marche pas. We just say this movie is less exciting than the last one. He is not as tall as his brother. This restaurant is much better than the one we visited last week. And for some translation, we have ce film est moins excitant que le précédent. Il n'est pas aussi grand que son frère. Ce restaurant est bien meilleur que celui que nous avons visité la semaine dernière. So, ça, c'est les équivalents en français. So as you see, you always use not as plus your adjective plus as. So please, everyone, could you write an example in the chat with not as plus adjective as, s'il vous plaît. So what can you think of? Mireille says not as happy as her friend. Thank you, Mireille. That is perfect. Does anyone else want to try? Emily says not as strong as somebody. Perfect. Raymond, this lesson is not as difficult as the last lesson. Perfect. Péridon, the weather is not as sunny as last week. Parfait. N'oubliez pas le premier as. Mais c'est parfait. Not as small as my brother. Merci. Jordan, c'est not as small as my brother. Beautiful. Does anyone else want to try? So these are perfect examples of how we use not as plus our adjective and another as. So thank you, everyone. Let's continue. So what are some common mistakes and how do we correct them? Many learners make mistakes like doubling comparative forms or using incorrect structures. For example, this jacket is more warmer than that one. So in this one, we need to see that warm, there is one syllable. So I don't have to add the word more. I can simply say, this jacket is warmer than that one. She is the most happiest person I know. Happy, so happiest, I can leave out most and say, she is the happiest person I know. My car is more faster than yours. I leave out more and say, my car is faster than yours. So here is a real life explanation. If you are choosing a hotel, you might say, this one is cheaper, but the other one is more comfortable. When talking about the weather, you could say, today is colder than yesterday, but last week was the coldest. So we use the comparative and then we use the superlative. Let's go on to mastering superlatives in different contexts. Using the most and the least for emphasis. Superlatives are used when comparing more than two things or people. The most emphasizes the highest degree of something, while the least expresses the lowest. This is the most expensive hotel in the city. She is the least experienced player on the team. You use least plus an adjective for all adjectives, regardless of the length. So with our comparison or our superlatives, we have the one syllable, two syllables. It's not the same with least. Least we use with all of our adjectives. The superlative form is used to compare three or more people, places, or things and show the highest or the lowest degree of a quality. For example, this is the most beautiful place I have ever visited. What are some of the rules? For short adjectives, those are adjectives with one syllable, or they end in Y, we add EST. For example, tall becomes taller, tallest. Happy becomes happiest. Long adjectives, so those are two syllables or more, we use most before the adjective. Example, expensive, expensive. 3, most expensive. You also find irregular adjectives. So some change completely. For example, good, the superlative will be best. We use superlatives with in for places and of for groups or time periods. For example, he is the best student in the class. This was the most exciting match of the season. This is the most beautiful place I've visited in France. Sometimes we combined our superlatives with the present perfect. Superlatives are often combined with the present perfect. So have, ever, plus the past participle, to emphasize that something is the most extreme. For example, best, worst, most interesting in our lifetime. So we have certain examples. This is the best meal I have ever eaten. That was the most exciting match I have ever watched. Et pour la traduction, on a c'est le meilleur repas que j'ai jamais mangé. C'était le match le plus excitant que j'ai jamais vu. So how do we create it? We use have, so le verbe avoir. We conjugate it with the adverb ever and with the past participle. This is the best meal I have ever eaten. So if you would like to participate, please write your own example in the chat. So try to think of your own one. For example, I can say, this is the best conference I have ever done, to give you an example. Raymond says, so Cedric says, this is the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. Perfect. Raymond says, it was the best movie I have watched this year. Remember, watched, c'est que le participe passé, c'est le verbe au passé. Séverine, this chocolate cake is the best cake I have ever eaten. Emily, this is the best pizza I have ever eaten. Jean-Louis, this trip I have ever participated. Mireille, this is the biggest cake I have ever seen. And just to talk about it, n'oubliez pas que c'est le troisième verbe parce qu'on a le verbe de base, le passé simple et le troisième, c'est le participe passé. Donc, we have see, saw and seen. Donc, merci Mireille. Jean-Louis, this is the best trip I have ever had. Parce que pour un voyage, on dit I have ever had. On ne dit pas participer, c'est une fausse amie. Mais merci Jean-Louis. Alors, I think we have one more. Thanks. Je vous en prie. Let's have another look. So, popular words and their changes. The adjective intelligent, so intelligent, more intelligent, most intelligent. Friendly, friendlier, friendliest. Dangerous, more dangerous, most dangerous. Difficult, more difficult, most difficult. Comparing actions and not just things. Let's have a look. How adverbs change in comparative and superlative forms. Adverbs can change to show comparison, just like adjectives. With adverbs ending in ly, you must always use more to form the comparative and most to form the superlative. So remember, adverbs, they describe the verb. He drives fast. She runs quietly. She speaks well. Whereas adjectives, they change the noun. So here we will have fast as the adverb. The comparative will be faster. The superlative will be fastest. Quickly, quietly will be more quietly and most quietly. Well will be better and best. So a real life explanation would be at work, you might say, she works harder than anyone in the office. So using adverbs with the comparative and the superlative, our adverb could be hard, but it changes like the adjective, harder. And then we can see we need more. So there is not a version for hardest. We can't say more harder or more early, but we can say slowly becomes more slowly. Expressing frequency, intensity, and manner in comparisons. He works harder than me. She always arrives earlier than her boss. So expressing subtle differences in meaning. What is the difference between no better than and not any better than? No better than suggests something is just as bad, where not any better than means there is no real improvement. Let's look at some examples. This new policy is no better than the old one. That means it is just as bad. His second attempt wasn't any better than his first. That means that there was no improvement. How do we use comparisons for persuasion or opinion? Let's look at some examples. This option is far more practical than the alternative. Your idea is much more effective than his. So in real life, if you were debating your travel choices, you could say taking the train is much cheaper and more comfortable than flying. We also have examples where we use the more with some information, the more, for example, or the less and less. The more you practice, the better you become. The less you worry, the happier you feel. So en français, l'équivalent, c'est plus et plus, au moins et moins. Par exemple, plus tu lis, plus tu apprends. So the more you read, the more you learn. To sum up, comparatives and superlatives are more than just ER and the EST. We've explored different ways to compare, from less than to the best I have ever seen, and even how to emphasize or soften comparisons. Mastering these structures will make your English richer and more precise. I hope you leave today with new tools to express yourself more effectively. So thank you everyone for joining me for this evening's conference. Is there anyone who would like to make a comment or ask a question about today's conference? No? It was all clear? Wonderful. So thank you everybody for joining me this evening. Remember that you can download the conference from the chat. So I will see you next week in our next conference. Have a beautiful weekend, everyone. Thank you and goodbye.